have a 10-week thing we're starting today, and it's really our ethics as a church. It's kind of the main core values that fuel who we are, and it is by no means a comprehensive list or complete, of course, in any way, but it is our best kind of stab at laying down what makes sense for who we are. And as you know, as a church, we are always seeking to know more, to understand more. So this could change over time. Some of these things we could maybe understand something a little bit better as a community and adjust some of the language behind it. If you heard me 10 years ago, or you heard me 10 years before that, you'd realize that over time we've tried to know better and then do better. It doesn't mean that we're knowing best and doing best. We're not there, but we're knowing better and doing better. That's our heart, is week after week and month after month as a community of people. How do we understand the heart of God better? How do we understand how to love one another better? How do we make space and room for people that we haven't made space and room for traditionally? And so as we continue to do this, these 10 weeks will be one a week. They're going to be a little bit shorter of lessons, because instead of trying to do 2 a week and making it longer, we're going to have a little bit shorter, which works out because we have our food truck Sunday today. And so the idea is to make this shorter. Notice I said the idea is to make this shorter, but who knows? We went over the 10 last week, and so we're going to start with number 1 this week. And this one, I want you to remember, before we put it on the screen, that just because I say something is more important than something else, or something that we need to reprioritize and put some more priority on something else, doesn't mean the other thing in the equation is not important or doesn't deserve priority. It just means that I think that the priorities have shifted in a way that isn't healthy for our mindset as believers. And so this first one is a harvest ethic that we truly believe is very necessary and due in our world, in our state, in our country, in our city. And that is simply, Jesus is a model for living more than an object for worship. It does not mean that we don't worship Jesus. Does everybody get that? I don't want any hate mail, all right? It does not mean that we don't worship Jesus. It means that simply right now, the Christian industry out there is $4.3 billion. And almost half of that is Christian music and worship music. That's just in the United States alone. We spend a couple of $1 billion as a nation creating an environment, writing songs around, putting on productions and shows, encouraging people to worship in a corporate setting. That doesn't even begin to scratch the surface of what's being done on Sunday mornings in churches. That's more than likely tens of billions of dollars. That's just the Christian music industry, the concerts, the music sales, the shows out there. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry. And it seems like everybody's answer out there from the evangelical faith world is, we need to worship Jesus better. Some of you are getting nervous, that's all right. And I would venture to say, we've gotten pretty good at the worship part. Or we've gotten a lot better at the worship part than we have in the modeling part. You know? Do I have any models in the house? I'm the only one? All right. That makes me feel alone. I'm a hand model. We have learned really well. I mean, we have sung some of these songs so many different ways we don't even we have sung more songs that they're running out of ways to write them. Really. I mean, there's only so many ways you can sing like thunder and lightning. I was like, that was a ripoff from Garth Brooks, I think, that whole concept. Too old? All right. There you go. Thank you. Down there. All right. Ripe old age of 40. You know it. We have sung these songs every way we can, and yet it seems like we're getting better and better at the worship part. We have bigger and bigger concerts. We have church worship teams that are now platinum selling recording artists. Like, that's what we've done with that. And yet, while that seems to be increasing and expanding at an absolutely alarming rate, we have gotten less like Jesus, more hateful, more divisive, more bigoted, more, come on, less patient, less hopeful, more anxiety, less happy, less kind, more isolated. I think I said that one. All of the things that Jesus tried to model the opposite of, we seem to be getting more and more further and further away from the model of Jesus. So when I see those two things happening, instead of crossing in the middle, they've gone like this. And one is way over here and one is way down here. I say this needs to be one of our ethics. It's not that we don't worship God or sing praise to God, but we have done that so well, and I believe wholeheartedly in lieu of the hard part. It's easy to go to a show at Amalie Arena and see, Passion come through with their whole Christian Stanfield and all those guys, or whoever, Elevation Worship, Planet Shakers, whoever's out there, and go see their show and the lasers and the lightning and all that kind of stuff that happens. And we try to do a little bit of that here, and I love all the creative part of that, and that's great. I feel good, and everybody's singing the same songs, and everybody's on the same page, and everybody's the same color. Wait, that's not, sorry about that. You'll get that later. And everybody together, I can't help myself. Everybody together it just feels so like, I am just like everyone else here, and everyone else is just like me, and we just feel the same thing and think the same thing, and that feels so good, and that's so wonderful. But what happens when we get home and our neighbor, who doesn't look like us, vote like us, think like us, cranky, nasty? I have an idea. Let's blast the worship music louder in the house while we dance around the kitchen together. That might get them saved. Come on. So as we look at this to the scriptures, and I said last week that each 10 of these points, somebody wrote a book on the opposite of them, and how really it's the progressive church trying to lie to people and trying to get people to be, we're saying this, but we really are saying this. And so some of the critics of this tenet, this idea of Jesus as a model for living more than an object for worship, the translation for that, and the next one up there, says they're saying that Jesus isn't divine, but just a good moral teacher. That's definitely not what we're saying. We believe that if there is divine influence in our life, it should change the way we act. Do you hear me today? Or if a divine influence in our life does not change the way we act, I'm really questioning whether or not it's a divine influence. Can we handle that together? If your relationship with your Creator, with God, doesn't change the way you act, if my relationship with God doesn't change the way I act, then am I even worshiping something that's real? Only now, this is a turn of events. Jakima's on my side, and the rest of you are looking at me upset. Really, do we really ultimately buy this if it doesn't change? Like, if we really believe that, let's read this in 1 Peter 2:21. It says, "For to this you have been called, because Christ also suffered for you, leaving you an example so that you might follow in his steps." 1 Corinthians 1:11, you can put that up there, says, "Be imitators of me as I am of Christ." The Mirror translation says, "Mirror me as I mirror Christ." In other words, think about it this way. Jesus is not an example for us, but of us. Do you hear me today? See, think about this for a moment. You have Adam and Eve, you have the lineage of humanity up to the point of Jesus being birthed to Mary. You have all that happening. God took the form of mankind. He became us so he could be an example not for us, but of us. Which is why let me put it this way. When he became us, or the form of us, to be an example of us, it almost removed completely anyone's excuse to not be a representation of the kindness and goodness of God on the earth. Because it's like, I kind of have that problem. I am just dumb enough to believe that if somebody can do it, I can do it too, which gets me in a lot of trouble. I just believe that. I'm like I will literally watch somebody swim and think to myself on the Olympics and be like, if I put a couple months in, I could do that. That wasn't supposed to be funny. Oh, look at him. Listen, yesterday, I don't even know how this is gonna tie in, but I'll figure out a way. Yesterday, for the first time in a long time, me and Robin, by ourselves, floating in the pool on rafts that she recently ordered. This is difficult for me to talk about. But she looked over at one point and she said, "Do you like the new raft I got you?" And I said, "I love it." And she said, "This one fits you better." I said, "What?" Now, folks, we did not have drinks in our hands. This was not, I had a Coke Zero in my hand at this point, and she had water, so this was not influenced, if you know what I mean. She said, "This one fits you." I said, "What do you mean?" She goes, "Well, you're not rolling off the side of it. It's wider." I literally just stared at her like this. Because you're like, I stared at her. That maybe that was confirmation more than it was. But I said, "What are you saying?" She's like, "Oh, the other rafts, don't you kind of like fall off the edge of them?" I said, "I have never fallen off the edge of a raft in my life." You can ask her after service. I have never fallen off of the edge of a raft. It's not like I get on a raft and like, oh, like this, and I just flop over. Never in my life have I fallen off a raft unless someone pushed me. So I don't know, but what did she put in Amazon to find these rafts? A raft you can beach a whale on, or Mack truck raft. I don't know but I was like, y'all need to talk to her about that. And she said, "That's not what I mean." That's not what you meant. You literally said to me, "This one's wider than the other ones." All right, whatever. But Jesus in all form, becoming like us, literally removed all excuse for us to say, "Well, we didn't know. We didn't think. Maybe that's not how I was supposed to be. I didn't know I was supposed to act that way. I didn't know I was supposed to respond that way." And then, I don't know if you realize this, but there's a couple of scholars have devoted their life to understanding the ins and outs of the life of Jesus. And I'm gonna just read this to you because I found it very fascinating. And maybe you didn't know this, but let me see this, let me get it right. I think I would highlight it. We know that Jesus was the son of a family of Galilean farmers. They were peasants and they were illiterate. We know that Jesus could read, but nowhere do we see evidence that he could also write. Those are two different skills in antiquity. It is perhaps the great tragedy of Jesus that his ministry was so unbelievably short. My personal estimation is about 18 months. The man has barely enough time to write down his vision of the new kingdom, even if he wanted to. So because what we do is we take the words in the life of Jesus in this 18-month period, and yeah, we talk about it. We value it, especially the miracles, because those are cool. But then we spend the rest of New Testament Christianity swearing by the words of Paul. And here's an interesting thing. Paul never even met Jesus. Paul was not a disciple of Jesus. Paul was trying to take a Jewish tradition and wrestle with the words of that tradition, and then take that and try to reach people outside of the Jewish tradition. Therefore, writing things that would make sense to them and their culture and their prevalent faith and what was going on in their territory or their region. Right? Let's warm this up for you, all right? If I went to I don't know, let's pick something not controversial, like a MAGA rally, okay? If I went to a MAGA rally, I probably wouldn't, unless I wanted to stir up controversy, wear a Biden-Harris shirt. Or sadly enough, not a pride flag, right? If I was trying to reach people there, it doesn't mean that I'm Republican or Democrat. It doesn't mean that I'm pro the LGBT community having rights or anti. It just means that I chose not to wear it because I'm trying to reach a people group that are probably not going to even open their ears up if they see certain things. So every word of Paul, we have to filter through who is he writing it to, what was he leaving out, what was he majoring on. And so when we wrestle with that, it is actually healthy to wrestle with the words of Paul the way that Paul wrestled with the words of Moses. We actually do Paul a service if we wrestle with his words the way he wrestled with the words of Moses. And we somehow in the evangelical church, we really easily skip over the words of Jesus sometimes. You know why? Because they're hard. Because they require effort. Because they require true humility. Because they require constant questioning and asking ourselves, have we got it right? Because he did things that, there's no other way to put it than this. Jesus was a political activist. He was killed for his activism. He was killed because he was trying to take down the system. Do you hear me today? He was killed because he was trying to take down the system. He was killed for healing on the Sabbath. He was killed for talking to the woman at the well. He was killed for healing the blind man. He was killed for loving people that the church had thrown away and had said, you know what, I don't know if this is what you should be doing. Do you know who you're talking? Even his disciples would question him. Why are you talking to her? He was everything today that I'm telling you right now, this is my heart. This is my heart's desire. My number one goal as a church, I'm going to tell you this right now, is to be a church that wouldn't kick Jesus out. Because I promise you, he'd be kicked out of some churches. And I hope to God if he took on the form of of somebody who didn't look like the paintings and walked in here in bodily form, that we wouldn't kick him out. And I'm going to go a step further. Every time we do kick someone out, I'm going to turn this way because some of y'all are giving me daggers right now. I said, every time we do kick someone out, we have kicked out Jesus. Every time we do tell somebody, you can come, but you can't do that, we've kicked out Jesus. Every single time that we've looked somebody in the face and said, well, you're welcome here, but we've kicked out Jesus. I'm gonna tell you right this, every Sunday across America, Jesus is getting kicked out of churches. Where's your scriptural basis for that? What you've done unto the least of these, you've done unto me. And when we see the least of them, quote unquote, even though they're not the least of them, because the Bible says the first shall be last and the last shall be first. So I believe God in this season is elevating the ones that thought they were the least to becoming the best. Come on, church. What we've done unto the least of these, we've done unto him. So I just want to be a church where Jesus wouldn't be kicked out, which requires a real vigilant study and then practical action for who Jesus is and what he would do in the earth today. And we cannot allow ourselves to be, listen to me, I am going to get stirred up here now. We cannot allow ourselves to be offended by something Jesus would do. If our religion is offended because we are doing something Jesus would do, what are we doing? I've grown up around pastors and religious leaders my whole life, our whole family has, and there's some good ones out there and there's some not so good ones out there. And I know we're all human beings, but I do believe that if you're going to preach it, you need to at least try to do it. Doesn't mean you're always going to be able to, but you at least better try to do it. And I'll never forget one time, we had a friend of ours who had a pastor that he was connected with. This has been so many years ago, you couldn't figure out who it was if you wanted to. That's why I feel comfortable telling the story. And honestly, even if you could figure it out, I'd still tell it. But we had a pastor that my dad knew for years who sent to us a pastor who had a nephew who was having some issues and needed to check into our program. And so he was going to bring the nephew down. He was from the Northeast. That's all I'm going to tell you, but it'll paint a picture for you. Not that we don't love people from the Northeast, but this one was not a good representation. And he came down with his nephew and came into the program, and my dad so lovingly and kindly said to me, basically, you entertain him. So I did, and I first went to pick him up, and he got in the car and said a couple of things that were off base that he thought was funny, and they weren't. And then he proceeded to say, let's grab some coffee. Is that narrowing it down for you? And I said, sure. So we went through Starbucks and got some coffee, and we were heading into the movie theater, and there was a Mercedes, brand new Mercedes convertible, one of the, not the C-Class, something fancy, SLK, CLK, whatever, your mama. Okay. And he was walking by the thing, and he was just about done with his coffee, and he thought it'd be funny as he's walking by just to dump the coffee in the SUV or in the convertible, just on the leather seats, and laugh all the way in. I thought, oh boy, we're not in Neverland anymore. Okay, and he was supposed to. That was I think a Sunday night, and he was supposed to speak on Wednesday night in church. We used to have Wednesday night service. I think it was over in that building. I thought, okay, that wasn't cool, and so we go into the movie theater and I'm already a little nervous, and he's got his phone on, and it's on full brightness, and he's just texting away and looking up stuff, and we're like maybe halfway down, and finally some people behind us in the movie finally said, hey, could you shut your phone off or get off your phone? And he turned around and jumped up like that and cussed them a blue streak, the way a New York boy would. I mean, cussed them up and down and left and right, and then sat back down in his seat after he threatened them a couple times and got right back on his phone. About 10 minutes later, finally shut the phone off. And I'm sitting there going, this guy's going to speak on Wednesday night? Pastor of a church, comes from a lineage of preachers, the whole deal. This wasn't just a bad day. And so I thought, man, this isn't good. So he went home that night. I got a call at about 11:30 p.m. because he was staying with his nephew at Harvest House. And him and his nephew got into a fist fight on the second story, and he tried to throw his nephew out the second story window. And if you'd hear this pastor preach, one of his favorite topics is holiness. And unfortunately, this is more prevalent than we think or know or imagine. And the ones that are treating humanity the worst seem to be the ones that will preach holiness the hardest. And the only thing, I'm not even going to say it. I will say this to you. I was appalled. I came home, called my dad. I said, Dad, I don't think we want to have this guy speak Wednesday night. And he said, what happened? And I told him. My dad said to me, he said, he did what every great father and leader would do. He said, you call him and tell him. I said, what? You call him and tell him. I had to call him on the phone, and he was shocked, to say the least. that after I had witnessed those behaviors, that I would dare challenge his right to be in this pulpit. My problem is this, church. We need to hold people accountable. Do you hear me? Not for how well they know the book. Not how many scriptures we can quote or how many theological arguments we can win, because all of that is rubbish, I believe, in the eyes of God, if we don't do the simple things like loving our neighbor. Come on, like caring for one another, like speaking and encouraging one another and building one another up and edifying one another and speaking life into people and actually being a shining example. It doesn't mean you're not gonna have a bad day and you're not gonna have a bad moment. But if we live our lives one way, but yet we wanna throw scriptures in people's face another way, I would say we need to reprioritize how much we're worshiping versus how much we're modeling. Do you hear me, church? I am shocked, and we'll end here in the next couple of minutes, but I am shocked to know that it is very clear that someone like that, who is not a bad person, but has obviously made some bad decisions, it's probably not the first time that pastor has acted this way around other pastors. And based on how shocked he was that I said, you cannot speak in our church, I'm guessing that he's acted that way around other pastors and they've still let him speak anyways, and maybe even joined in. And folks, can I be real with you? The greatest threat to Christianity is not the LGBTQ community. The greatest threat to Christianity isn't Joe Biden. Two people. The greatest threat to Christianity isn't drag queens. That got more applause than Biden. You guys hate Biden worse than you hate drag queens. This looks like a political poll I'm doing right now. I'll tell you what, 100% uncomfortable. I got that down. The greatest threat to Christianity is we don't act the way we preach. You think it's some outside, quote unquote, outside force? You think it's some agenda? Come on. I'm going to address that too. Anyone who thinks the LGBTQ people have some unwritten agenda that no one's ever seen and no one's ever seen a copy of, y'all, you've lost your minds, okay? The agenda is, I just want to be a human being and be able to love who I want to love and marry who I want to marry. That's the agenda. And guess what? If that's the agenda, you have an agenda, I have an agenda, we all have it. If an agenda is I want to be treated equal, then we're all guilty of having an agenda, okay? That's not the problem. The problem is simply this, folks. We don't model Jesus. We do a heck of a job of worshiping him, but we don't model Jesus. We don't act like him when the times get tough and the rubber meets the road and we're face to face with a decision we've got to make that might be difficult for us. We would rather go to a concert and spend the money and sing the songs and buy the t-shirt than actually act like Jesus acted on the earth. Because I'm telling you right now, anytime there was a line drawn in the sand or there was people put on one side of a fence or the other, Jesus jumped to the side of the marginalized, the persecuted, and the afflicted. That's where Jesus was. And so we're gonna, as long as people are dividing, we're gonna keep jumping to the side of the marginalized, the persecuted, and afflicted. And hopefully one day we'll stop doing that. But the fact that the most evil thing, the most divisive thing that's happening in our country is coming from the Christian church makes me sick and out of breath. Yeah. Do you hear me today? I need you to get on board with this, okay? I need you to connect with this because we have got to make it very clear that that is not Christianity. That is not being a follower of Christ. That is a bunch of nonsense that's being used as a political tool and pawn by people that are way smarter than me and you and have a lot more money and influence. We need to step out of that nastiness and nonsense, stop blaming everything else and look within and start demanding that we as believers start acting like Jesus and not just worshiping him. Come on. Are you with me? That's why this is number one on our list, because if this happened, if churches, if Christians, if believers started acting like Jesus instead of just worshiping him and saying all the songs and all of the things, we would be so much better as a nation. I don't believe that if people are looking for revival, quote unquote, I don't even know how to define that, no one else does. But if people are looking for revival, revival is only going to happen when the church gets serious about acting like Jesus. It's not going to happen because we win some political war. Do you hear me? Do you know who Jesus got the maddest at? Do you know who Jesus got, not just the maddest, period, mad. Do you know who he got mad at? Jesus got mad at religious leaders who were taking advantage of common people. The money changers in the temple were not like the bank account. God hates the IRS. He flipped over the tables in the... Pay your taxes, okay? Stop that nonsense. Seriously, pay your taxes. I mean, pay every dime and not a dollar more, okay? But no, I'll tell you what is interesting about that. Those weren't just like money changers. They were people that the religious leaders had basically signed an agreement with to come in and to sell the sacrificial items that the people that were coming for a holy holiday needed in order to make sacrifice in the temple. So it was a racket. The religious leaders said, if you really want, does this sound familiar? If you really want to be Christian and holy, you're going to need to have a dove to sacrifice. You're going to need to have a goat. You're going to need to have this. You're going to need to have that. And oh, what's that, weary traveler? You've been traveling for 5 days to get here, to come to this holy celebration, this convention, this conference, this convocate together, and you couldn't bring a bird with you because the bird would die, the dove would die on the journey, or you couldn't find one along the way. Well, lucky you, we've got one here. It just so happens to be 5 times the price that it normally is, or 10 times the price that it normally is. But don't forget, I know it's a little expensive, but it's convenient and it's here. And so if you buy it and then you use it the way we tell you to use it, we promise you're going to be closer to God and your sins are going to be more forgiven than the people who refuse to buy it. And so as they were in the temple selling their stuff at exorbitant rates and prices and changing money from people that were coming from foreign lands in order to basically take advantage of good-hearted people that had come to actually just worship and to connect with God and to hopefully find forgiveness based on their understanding and belief at the time, they were being taken advantage of. And the religious leaders, the pastors of that, the priests of that synagogue or that temple were in on it, and they had colluded with people to come in and rip off their own people. That's who Jesus flipped the tables on. It wasn't some secular merchant. Come on, do you hear me? It wasn't some IRS agent or government employee. He flipped the tables on the religious elite who through their system was taking advantage of people. It was a systematic injustice that Jesus got the most angry at. It was systematic injustices that were being supported by the church that Jesus got so angry that he became violent in the temple and literally took a whip and started cracking the whip, driving the people out of there, because he said, as long as I'm here, these 18 months of my ministry, as long as I'm on the earth, you're not going to use the system of faith to commit atrocities and injustices on people who don't know any better in this moment or people who are at a disadvantage. They were intentionally exploited groups of people that were coming in, and the church was taking advantage of them. That's what Jesus got mad at. He didn't get mad at the sex worker. He didn't get mad at the blind man. He didn't get mad at the woman who was caught in adultery. He didn't get mad at the woman married 5 times. He didn't get mad at any of them. He got mad at the people who were taking advantage in the name of God. So, I know that's a lot for a Sunday. We'll end there with this. We believe that, you can put it up there for me. We believe that blue particles, if you stare into them long enough, you will see the Holy Spirit. We believe, one more back, blue particles again, that Jesus is a model for living more than an object for worship. We are not saying he's just a moral man and not the divine. What we are saying is, if we are divinely inspired, then it should change the way we treat one another. Very clearly, they shall know you by your fruits. If I don't see it change in my actions, then what have I really latched onto? Will you stand with me together? Then we're going to pray and we're going to go eat. There's only really two hard historical facts about Jesus that are backed up by archaeology, that are backed up by ancient writings, that are backed up in other writings and books outside of the Bible. It's two things. Number one, that Jesus was a Jew from Nazareth who led a popular Jewish movement in Palestine at the beginning of the first century. And number two, Rome crucified him for doing so. So much else of what we try to attribute and change, cherry pick, try to make Jesus fit into our sweet little mold of complacency and sameness and all that stuff. You got to refer back to this. He was a guy that led a political movement in Palestine and was crucified by the Roman government for it. Because he was a threat to power, he was a threat to so much, and he refused to let people who are on the outskirts of society feel like they didn't belong, they weren't included, they weren't loved. That looks a million different ways for us, and I don't know what part of that you play or I play, but I am asking you to play a part as a part of who we are. Keep in the intention of your mind and actions the idea that we're gonna, as a church, as long as, let me put it this way, as long as there are people that we're encountering all the time, in person or on social media, as long as there are people out there that we're encountering who feel like God hates me, I could never belong to a church, I will never be loved or accepted, those people, whatever, as long as that's going on, Harvest, we're probably going to always be the obnoxious new PhD student in the corner that won't shut up. We are not, I wasn't talking about you, by the way, all right? Although that's perfect. I really wasn't. That was a complete coincidence. That you are, it's funny because you are a PhD student and you are annoying, so I...
That's why I like Jim better. I go through all the pain just to support you.
All right. That's translation, please. Okay. So we will probably always be the church that people are like, oh, you go there? Yeah, I go there. I go there because they're really serious about doing whatever it takes to make people feel loved. And it isn't going to be perfect, but we're very serious about it. So get used to people looking at you funny when you say you go to Harvest. I love it. I love the look. It looks something like this. Oh. It looks like they're stroking out. Oh. Yeah. Do you know the miners then? Yeah, they kind of run the place. Yeah, I know them. Oh. I've heard about those people. Yeah. Let's just pray. That's the best way to end this. Lord, I thank you for this that is so relevant and right on time for us to just kind of refocus, kind of narrow in the target on where we should be putting our energies when it comes to our faith. And I really believe that it's more than ever time to focus on modeling you and your life here on the earth. Not letting up on how we worship or praise or adore or any of that stuff, but just beginning to shift our energies to modeling, to being who you've asked us to be, who you've created us to be, what actually is most natural to our original identity. And so, Father, help us do that as a community and continue to do that. We do a pretty good job, but I know we can do even better. And that's our heart's desire, is to know better and to do better. And so just encourage us, give us faith, remind us of these words and moments we need it as we leave here today. Thank you for your blessing, your safety, your protection, your encouragement on our journey this week. In your name we pray, and everyone says, amen. Amen. Y'all come get some wings, come hang out outside, get under some shade, and we'll see you out there in a couple minutes.